Once again, we have a position where the king is a little bit in danger, and here it's good if you recognize some mating patterns, or better to say the mating net, because we can feel that the king on g5 doesn't have the safest life on the planet. So let's see what choices black has to choose from. King takes g4, king h4, and king takes h6. In my opinion, the difference between king takes g4 and king h4 is not crucial, but king takes g4 takes the pawn. King h4 doesn't take the pawn in both cases. The only risky variation is rook takes g3, h takes g6, and h7. So that means that here king takes g4 should have our preference. Here rook takes g6 is the only dangerous follow-up for white, h7. Now, of course, we have the knight guarding the promotion square, but we can also use our rook to do it in a better way. The only small chance white can try after bishop f6 with the idea of rook e7. But here, if I'm lazy and I don't want to have any hassle about rook e7, I can see that rook e8 is practically speaking the easiest choice, because now we can evaluate the resulting ending in favor for black. We take on f4, we have 2 pawns up, and we will create 2 different pass pawns which have a long distance from each other. And the only thing which is sometimes good to pay attention to, the promotion square here is the wrong one. That's why if we form a pass pawn, better to form it on the b file if possible and not on the a file. But even then, since like the bishop doesn't have the diagonal as he's blocked by his own pawn, I believe still black would be winning. So that means king takes g4 was by far the easiest solution, because okay, it requires some calculation. You may give back the piece, but still, like, eventually you should always take the decision where you are sure that from the practical point of view it's the easiest one. I mean, sometimes you can take a piece and then, well, you get the material, but you are forced to play at least the next 100 moves in a very precise way. And that's why actually, like, here you calculate a bit, you know that you give back the piece, you receive a winning position, and you don't have to worry about anything. In the game, however, here black took on h6. And after h6, of course, there is g5 as one candidate move. But in general, after king h6, we can spot that the king has 0 squares. So what could be some tricks? Okay, g5 we have to consider first, but after king h5 we see that the king has the square on g4 and we cannot take it in a good way. Once the king is on g4, then also that square is available. So this doesn't help. And let's be logical, the only piece which doesn't yet play is the rook. If the rook was on h1, it's mate immediately, and this gets us, since also g4 can be hanging with a check, this gets us to the move king f2. Of course, the only dangerous move here is to take on g8, as rook takes g4 will be answered by rook h1, and then there is still the mate to come, so we don't even have to take the rook. So that means rook takes g8. Now the only square available for the king is the g6 square, and there we have our pawn ready to go to f5. So this square is not really available, only for one small moment. So check has to be calculated, because when we calculate, it's always good to go first for the concrete variations before we look for captures moves with a threat or so-called prophylactical moves. King g6, f5 check is another check to be observed, and after king g5 we can see that the king has 0 squares apart from the fact that the g4 pawn is hanging. And here after king g3 the game is actually over. It's also good to go to g3, not to f3, because of this diagonal. It's always good to look for tactical indicators also for yourself. And after king g3, rook h5 is a mating threat, and even if you take the bishop on e5 to have the square on f6 after d takes e5, nothing changed, because you cannot prevent rook h5. Unfortunately, the bishop is not allowed to jump over e8 or over the bishop to over the rook to d7. So yes, that's the thing, how you can easily lose a game when you don't smell that there is some issue. Of course, king h6 is material-wise a much nicer move because there is no pass pawn, there is no sacrifice. But, well, here the mating net can be smelled, and if it cannot be smelled because of lack of experience, you can still see that you don't have many options. And from the practical point of view, as I said, choose the way where you are sure that you receive a winning position and where you are sure that the continuation of the game is not hard. Sometimes you don't have the luxury of choices, but here you also don't have the luxury of choices because king takes h6 actually loses the game. But there are actually moments in the game where you can decide between two options, and then of course takes the option which for you personally is practically the better one. And I believe that we will have such examples still to come here on my DVD, so there's nothing to worry about. This is just a general kind of tip I would like to give you because it makes life easier.